What Really Happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Monday, May 23rd, 2016, start of a brand new week, and we've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. A couple of quick program notes. This is going to be a very busy week. In fact, today's the only day we don't have a guest in our third hour. And tomorrow we're going to have Dave Martin on Vince Foster and the latest attempt to claim that Foster did commit suicide. He just did it someplace embarrassing, and that's why his body was dumped in Fort Marcy Park. They're thrashing around trying to find something we'll believe in, and they're not having much luck. Wednesday, Walter Brash, expert on fracking and its harmful effects to our health and the environment. Thursday, we're going to be playing the interview that we did over the weekend with Alan Favish, also about the Vince Foster case. We've got that to look forward to. And obviously Friday, the Lady Claire will be joining us. Next Wednesday, June 1st, Helen Davis Chapman on how J.P. Morgan was actually part of Bernie Madoff's giant Ponzi scheme. And Tuesday, June 7th, we're going to have Peter Koenig on about the upcoming collapse of the European Union. So things are really moving rapidly here. All right, let's get into it. Now, the latest polls averaged together are showing Donald Trump gaining and Hillary Clinton losing. Even the corporate media is having to grudgingly admit that Trump is pulling ahead of her. And as a matter of fact, Wayne Allen Roots is out there saying Hillary's sinking faster than the Titanic. And apparently in the new ABC poll, Trump has pulled an 11-point gain in just 1 month. And other polls are showing exactly the same thing. What's really interesting, though, is how the corporate media that is still trying to sell us Hillary, they're reporting on the polls where Hillary is ahead. You know, she's definitely ahead on polls of Hispanics. She's definitely ahead in polls on the gays. She's definitely ahead in the polls on the Muslims. But the United States of America isn't made solely of illegal immigrants, refugees, and the LGBT community. So, again, when you take all these polls all over the place and you average them together, Trump has just crossed Hillary. He's headed up. She is headed down. Now, when Hillary was ahead in the polls, she was out there trumpeting, "We're winning in the polls. We are unstoppable." And now, of course, that Trump is pulling ahead, she's saying, "These polls, they don't mean anything to me. I could care less. We're just going to shoot him anyway." Or some such nonsense as that. But the reality is, internally, the Hillary camp is in a panic because Trump is pulling ahead. And Hillary, because of her financial ties to her masters, is out there trying to campaign on issues and agendas that most Americans are absolutely opposed to. And Hillary apparently has out there one more time repeated her claim that we didn't lose a single person in Libya, not counting all those diplomatic personnel at the consulate. Now, story coming out of thehill.com. Tough question for Clinton on the economy. Are you better off? And I'm sure Hillary said, "Of course, I'm doing just great." And they'll come, no. We mean the American people. Are they better off than they were 8 years ago economically? And obviously, that's a completely different issue. But it's a very difficult area. Because, no, we're doing terribly. It's going downhill. But Hillary's doing great. She's doing wonderful. And there's an interesting story here from the New York Post about how corporate America basically bought Hillary Clinton for $21 million. And they start off the article by reminding everybody how Ronald Reagan was criticized in 1989. After leaving office, and he was never going to be in there again, he was paid $2 million for some speeches he made in Japan. But now we have Hillary Rodham Clinton, who's picked up $21 million in speaking fees to Wall Street firms, and she won't release the transcripts of the speeches. Maybe there aren't any. Maybe she didn't actually do any speeches. The checks just say speaking fee because that looks better than bribe. Another little revelation that's coming on out. Clintons took payments from supporters of the Trans-Pacific Partnership last year totaling $325,000. Another article coming out from Medium.com, Hillary Clinton and electoral fraud. And the author of the piece is basically talking about his apotheosis, where a few years ago he would, if asked, and say, of course, our elections are honest, they're fair, they're accurate, nobody can cheat. But after watching what's been happening, and then going back and doing a little more homework, has had the grand opening of the eyes, the Buddha on the road moment. Yes, election fraud is a major, major factor in politics in the United States of America. We actually can't even name the last president that we can guarantee actually represented the will of the people. Now, oddly enough, over at Newsweek, Kurt Eichenwald has come on out with an op-ed saying that basically, you know, you're just making a big fuss over nothing. Of course there are superdelegates, and of course there are going to be problems with the electronic machines, and really, what's wrong with you? You're just being picky about the fact that the elections might be inaccurate and stolen. You're just really making a mountain out of a molehill there. So we're seeing the corporate media once again trying to cover up for the fact that our elections are manipulated. And we've seen that through the years. We even saw it back in 2000 during that whole dangling Chad thing, where any story about election fraud would always end with the promise that it didn't change the final outcome. Yes, there were problems. Yes, this election machine gave negative totals. Yes, there was a problem here, but it didn't change the final outcome. That's an absolutely unsupportable statement. Simply because once you found fraud in an election, you don't know that you found it all. And so you cannot make a statement that the outcome wasn't changed. And let's be honest, when somebody rigs an election, it is to change that final outcome. There's no question about that. Now, here's a story coming out of Washington's blog. Intelligence officials are urging the FBI to basically get going on this Clinton email server scandal and whether top secrets were leaked to foreign governments. And they're pointing back on how quickly they moved on Petraeus. And why are they stalling now? Well, we know why they're stalling. The FBI is fearful that Hillary will be the next president, and she will take her revenge on them if they say anything bad about her now. Forgetting, of course, that if they came out with an honest assessment of what she's been doing, under Title 18, she cannot serve as president. And I think behind it all is the biggest dark secret of all. Remember back in 1996, the Chinagate scandal? Bill Clinton was running for re-election, and as president, he authorized the transfer, actually the sale, of very sensitive U.S. technology to China, technology with military applications. There were voices of opposition from the intelligence community, from the Pentagon, all over, that it was very dangerous and destabilizing for China to get their hands on this technology, but Bill Clinton signed the paperwork and sold it over there, and money poured into his re-election campaign, not only from the companies that made money selling the stuff to China, but from China itself, routed through Chinese-American citizens to nominally make it legal. But it did come out. This money was coming from China, in one documented case from Chinese intelligence. So, with that past pattern of behavior of the Clintons, we have Hillary, who has all of these top secrets, darkest secrets of the U.S. government's raw satellite intelligence, which is classified on creation, sitting on her private email server that had weaker security than the Ashley Madison website. Guccifer, the hacker, said when he was tooling around inside Hillary's server, he saw at least 10 other foreign IPs logged in, prowling through the files. Then you have the Clinton Foundation, which is little more than a slush fund, getting all these donations from foreign governments. 40% of the money that poured into the Clinton Foundation came from foreign sources. In many cases, because of the European adjunct and the Canadian office that were collecting payments and then just sending them in, identified only by that remote office, we don't know where a lot of this money came from. It's untraceable. And we know the Clintons have been spending a lot of that money on on themselves, on the traveled or on the campaign trail, which they're not supposed to do. And so we have an absolutely perfect espionage system with the weak email server delivering secrets and the charitable foundation to collect and launder the payments. Hillary doesn't have to actually go and rifle through file cabinets stealing documents the way Jonathan Pollard did. She doesn't have to go on out and draw X's on mailbox the way Aldrich Ames did, or leave documents taped underneath a bridge. It's an automated system, and the cash just poured on in. Now, on top of that, we have more and more attention starting to pay attention to Hillary's corporate ties and all the huge amounts of money coming in from Wall Street and other corporations. And basically the fact that Hillary is not shy about voicing whatever agenda the corporation wants. Her opinion is for sale to the highest bidder. And that's a very dangerous sort of personality to have in the Oval Office. All right, we're going to grab a real quick phone call. Obi in Colorado. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, Michael, I have a computer question for you. I keep getting all these Windows 10 things.
Yes.
And finally today, they popped one up that said Windows 10 will automatically update on Thursday of this week.
Okay, you need
so they were just going to.
You need to go out and do a Google search for something called GWX. That's Golf Whiskey X-Ray Control Panel, and you download that and run it, and it will delete all of the Windows 10 update materials, and you need to do it today or tomorrow because when Thursday comes, it's going to be a lot harder for you to get rid of that forced update. So that's GWX Control Panel. That's the one I use. There are a bunch of others out there, but I've got GWX Control Panel on all our Windows 7 machines, and it's working very, very well. Okay?
Okay, sir.
All right. Thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go. Getting on back to the news. Bernie Sanders has ramped up his feud with the Democratic Party establishment, as well he should. They are not being fair or objective or unbiased. And, Bernie Sanders is saying he is going to continue his campaign right up to the convention because there is a possibility that Judicial Watch between now and the convention could strike pay dirt on the email scandal and have Hillary dead to her. I mean, we already know she violated Section 793 of Title 18. In her own words, in her own email, she gave the subordinate, Jacob Sullivan, instructions to strip the classification headings off a classified document and send it by non-secure means. And it doesn't matter why, doesn't matter what was in the document, it doesn't even matter if Sullivan did it or not. The issuance of the order is the violation of Title 18. And Title 18 provides that anybody that's in violation of Title 18 is banned from holding public office, like, say, the presidency. So Sanders is right to stay in because like the sword of Damocles, the email server is hanging over Hillary's head, and it could drop at any moment. We're all out here looking for any evidence that will confirm Hillary was giving or sending or allowing to be stolen sensitive U.S. documents by foreign governments that just happen to also be very generous donors to the Clinton Foundation. If we can find just one documented case, then she's guilty of espionage. She's guilty of treason to the United States of America. And Sanders and Trump are right. Regardless of whether she gets away with this or not, there is a pattern of reckless decision-making going on here. And we can't allow that kind of recklessness to be handed the keys to the nuclear weapons. Now, Clinton is apparently very concerned that Sanders just will not go away, and she's issued this public announcement that she's ready to negotiate with Sanders when he's ready. We're going to talk. Now, maybe Hillary is going to hold out an offer to make Sanders her vice president if he'll just quit the race now. Maybe not. But obviously, Hillary is afraid. She's already had to start spending money that was allocated for the general election campaign in the primary season to stay ahead of Sanders. So he is definitely costing her dearly in terms of cash and political capital. Now, Bernie Sanders has come on out and said that he absolutely will not support Debbie Wasserman Schultz in her primary challenge, and says that if he becomes president, he absolutely will not reappoint her as head of the DNC. And I don't blame him. Debbie Wasserman Schultz has been out there said, we're going to make Hillary the nominee. We don't care what the people want. The people. What do you think this is, a democracy here? No, we will tell you what your leaders are going to be. And Bernie's not the only person out there saying it. Nationofchange.org has a headline story. Democrats cannot unite unless Debbie Wasserman Schultz goes. It's not Bernie Sanders and his people who are dividing the Democratic Party. It's Debbie Wasserman Schultz, because she wants to shove Hillary Clinton down everybody's throat and up their gluteus, and she doesn't care what damage she does to her own party. So, amazingly enough, up in Washington State, they just had their GOP state convention. And Ted Cruz walked away with 40 of Washington's 41 delegates. This man will not go away. He's like a zombie. He's risen again, must have delegates. Or delegates' brains. He definitely has those. And the article about this over in theweek.com was saying it is amazing how well Cruz is doing in some of these conventions, considering that he's not actually in the race any longer. Well, remember, he didn't say he quit. He just wasn't actively campaigning anymore. He was re-diverting all of his resources to buying and bribing and threatening the state delegates. And we got him on video actually handing a wad of cash to one of these delegates. And let us all remember, Ted Cruz does not meet the requirement to be a natural-born U.S. citizen to be President of the United States of America. He was born in Canada to parents who were Canadian citizens at the time. He's not eligible to serve as President of the United States, and by virtue of the 12th Amendment, he cannot be the Vice President. Now, his supporters are out there saying, well, Ted Cruz's mother is from Delaware. That makes him a citizen. Not so. Because under the Immigration and Naturalization Act, children born to American citizens in foreign nations out of wedlock do not receive birthright citizenship. Ted Cruz was Canadian by birth. He's only Canadian by birth. He's a naturalized U.S. citizen, and a naturalized U.S. citizen cannot serve as president. And I don't know about you, I am sick and tired of all these politicians who think the rules should not apply to them. And if you don't like the rules, there's a way to deal with it. It's called a constitutional amendment. But you don't get to stand up there and say, well, I don't qualify to be president, but I'm just going to pretend otherwise. And the more Ted Cruz tries to force a brokered convention to take the nomination away from Trump, Cruz is never going to be president of the United States of America. Because dividing the GOP is going to put Hillary in the White House. And if Cruz succeeds in stealing the nomination, you can bet Hillary Clinton's lawyers are going to go right to the Supreme Court to get him bounced out of the race because he is a Canadian citizen at birth. Maybe Ted Cruz is working for Hillary Clinton. Maybe he never intends to be president. He's just going to get a huge payoff down the road for derailing Donald Trump. But shame on every one of those delegates who says they're backing Donald Trump because they are either ignorant of or are flagrantly in violation of the Constitution, which is the highest law of this land. I think it's time to go long on tar and feathers, to be very honest. All right, let's talk about Egypt Air Flight MS-804. Almost as soon as it fell out of the sky, we were getting all of the media, terror, 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 terror. Don't even think anything else. It's terror, terror, terror. Which, that was the red flag right there, because normally everyone's out there saying, let's get the debris and take a look at what's going on. But in this case, they were, oh, it's terrorism. Absolutely no question it was terrorism, which right there says something's being covered up. Now, we know that the Egypt Air Flight 804 was flying over an active U.S. military exercise, Phoenix Express 2016, when it exploded. And we know the pilot was making evasive moves. More when we come back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about Egypt Air Flight 804. And as it turns out, as was also the case for TWA 800, there was an ongoing military exercise, Phoenix Express 2016, the United States and other nations participating. And there was a declared warning zone active at the time. And the track of Egypt Air Flight 804 brushes right up against the edge of that, just as was the case with TWA 800. And again, the fact that they started screaming terror, terror, terror before they even found the wreckage tells you there's something being hidden up there. Now, Egypt has a somewhat different idea. The Egyptian media is saying that Israel was also holding an exercise near the Phoenix battle group. And they're saying that Israel may have shot down the Airbus. May have been an accident. They may have been aiming at a drone, or maybe they thought it was an Egyptian horse-carrying aircraft or something. But nobody's buying terror simply because they came out and screamed terror way too quickly. And because there is a very long and tragic history of civilian airliners being shot down by accident by the military. The United Nations acknowledges at least 25 such incidents, most of which remain classified, but some have come to light. The Atavia DC-9, the Aer Lingus shoot-down, the Iranian Airbus, they couldn't keep that one under wraps. TWA 800, Malaysian Airlines Flight 370, most likely, and now, of course, this Egypt Air flight. We're going to grab a phone call. John in Barbados, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. Yeah, continuing with this Flight 804, if an aeroplane is shot down by a heat-seeking missile, it will take out one engine. Taking out one engine will give that effect of doing a sharp turn because the other engine is still on cruise power and no power coming from the engine that's been destroyed. And because you've lost power, it will tend to lose altitude as well.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. At that altitude, if you don't have both engines running, you're going to fall below stall speed very quickly.
Yeah, exactly. So the action of the aeroplane to a missile is exactly what the aeroplane did in this particular instance of 804.
Yeah, I could see that being the case. And in addition, of course, to disabling the engine almost immediately, because these missiles are used at high altitude and an airborne concussion wave is very weak, along with shrapnel, they have these expanding metal rings which are designed to fly out and slice through fuselage, control cables, fuel lines, and so forth and so on. That could have caused serious damage to the wing, even to the point where the wing collapses.
Yeah, absolutely, but not necessarily, though, Michael. If it was a missile with rods rather than the coiling wire, then it would have shot holes in and probably decompressed the aeroplane rapidly.
Well, here's the thing. Okay, if you lost power in an engine, the plane would tend to go into a spin rather than execute a turn, because a coordinated turn involves a bank and rudder and the rest of it. Whereas if you all of a sudden flame out in an engine, what's going to happen is you're going to tend to go into a flat spin. So we need to look, not that we're ever going to get the real data out of the black boxes, but that would be the first thing I'd be looking for, is if that 90-degree turn was a coordinated full turn versus simply going into a flat spin and sliding off to one side. But yeah, your scenario does make sense, and obviously if this was an accident, the missile involved is either a fire-and-forget heat seeker or a fire-and-forget radar missile with its own radar transmitter inside. Because if you're firing a semi-active missile, you can just always turn off the targeting radar, and the missile will just stop following what it's following.
Yeah. Anyway, so that was just my particular point of view from alerting you the other day of this exercise.
Yeah, well, a lot of people are now reporting on that one, this ongoing exercise. And again, primarily because it has been a tragic repeating pattern, I think more and more people are starting to think this is probably what happened to that plane. Anyway, listen, we've got to take a break for commercials. John, thank you very much for the phone call, and we'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And just got an article here from BBC reporting on the final moments of the Egypt airplane, saying that it made 2 sharp turns before it fell out of the sky. So that sounds to me like they knew something was on their tail and they were trying to evade. All right, we're going to go ahead and grab a phone call. James in Ohio. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
I thought of a propaganda device that could be used against Hillary, and I think it will be devastatingly effective. Film roll that seems to capture her essence. And, of course, I'm talking about Angela Lansbury's portrayal of Eleanor Prentice Shaw in The Manchurian Candidate, especially that less than 2 minutes at the end of her soliloquy as she's programming her son near the end. And she's talking about assassinating the presumptive presidential candidate.
Mm-hmm.
And she says, and we'll be swept into the White House with powers that will make martial law seem like anarchy. I mean, it seems like when she was a child, she must have seen a film and thought what other kids think when they see astronauts or firemen. You know, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it could very well be. It is an amazing speech and very scary, but of course in the context of the film it was supposed to be. But we always, I mean, even the Founding Fathers understood. The curse of political power is that it attracts the very sort of people who should not be allowed to have it. And that's why you have to have safeguards and rules and serious, serious limits on what these people can do. And, of course, we have a government right now that is just absolutely dedicated to the idea that there should be no limits on their power and authority.
I like to reiterate, since the right and left-wing establishment is uniting against the people with super PACs, super delegates, and all this, that Trump should choose Sanders as his running mate and run as an independent if and when they screw him out of the nomination. Both of them being in the election could ensure that Hillary wouldn't have a shot, and
no, you're forgetting the election fraud, and you're forgetting the fact that in a lot of states, the deadline for a petition drive to put them on the ballot at all has already passed. I think if Trump is cheated out of the nomination at the GOP convention, I think you're going to see rioting in the streets.
Right. Oh, well. Anyway, that's all I got for you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to switch over to Brian in New York. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Brian, are you there? Okay, I guess we lost Brian. So getting on back to the news here. Kind of an interesting little story coming out of the last great stand. Oh, Brian, are you there? I cannot hear Brian. Okay, now he's gone. Okay. All righty, getting on back to this story. There is a former director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, Michael Flynn, in an interview with Al Jazeera, said that Barack Obama knowingly helped ISIS to grow, knowingly armed ISIS, our declared enemy in the war on terror. That fits the legal definition of treason, giving aid and comfort to the enemy. And the mere attempt to provide support is treason. There's no quantitative thing where it says, well, if it's only 4 hand grenades, it doesn't mean. No, the intent to give aid to an enemy is treason. The Obama administration has committed treason and was aided and abetted by then Secretary of State Hillary Rodham Clinton. Okay, apparently Brian is now back. Brian in New York. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Okay, thank you. This is not the reason why I called, but the guy made a remark before about the Manchurian Candidate. A little bit of Hollywood. It's amazing that Angela Lansbury, who played Lawrence Harvey's mother, was actually younger than Lawrence Harvey.
Well, things like that happen in Hollywood.
Anyway, a couple of weeks ago, you made a remark, and I don't get a chance to really give you a call during the day because I'm usually working, but I'm on vacation now.
Good for you.
I wanted to give you a call. You made a remark one time about World War II that you said that everybody thought and is taught in the schools that the United States was responsible for ending the war with the Germans, and it really was the Russians. Could you explain that, please? Yeah,
basically, and it's not so much the schools, but Hollywood movie making that always portrays the Americans as victorious in World War II. The fact of the matter is the Americans didn't show up until the war, was pretty much over, and the Germans were already losing, following that disastrous attempt to reach Moscow. And the Nazis were decimated by the cold weather, the same that Napoleon was. And so, as a matter of fact, Germany, the tide had already turned against Germany when Roosevelt ginned up that Pearl Harbor deception to get us into the war. And basically, Roosevelt was holding out, bringing the U.S. into the war because he was blackmailing Winston Churchill to have the British pound sterling surrender its role as the global trade and banking currency in favor of the dollar.
All right. Well, thank you, Michael. Thank you for explaining that.
All right, you got it there, and we're going to switch over to Clinton, Las Vegas. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Mike, I was just thinking, I think at night of these things, but, a commercial that Donald Trump could do, like you're fired, if he had a Secretary of State that was giving extraordinary favors to federal government, to foreign governments, that was in turn giving donations to the Clinton foundations, you'd be fired. And it just seems like a good 30-minute soundbite. I hope Trump's people are listening to this. That would be a heck of a commercial.
It certainly would be a good commercial, and I've already seen a lot of graphics out there, parroting the "you're fired" relative to Hillary, relative to Obama, and it's certainly a very, very powerful idea and image. The reason Obama didn't do anything about what Hillary Clinton was doing, and it goes back to what I said, in American politics there are two levels of secrets. There are the little secrets that are the fodder for political campaigns, the little scandals, the extramarital affairs, Anthony Weiner's games with his cell phone. And those can be made public and argued back and forth because they don't threaten the system as a whole. Then you have the great secrets, the ones that if it came out and the public understood what it was all about, would completely destroy the legitimacy of the U.S. government. What really happened to John F. Kennedy, what really happened on 9/11, what really happened on TW-800. And a serving Secretary of State running an espionage operation right out of the Department of State with that private email server and charitable foundation is a scandal that would bring the entire government down, and that's why nobody dares touch it. Even Hillary Clinton's worst enemies are working to protect that, because it means their job. That's why Bernie Sanders in that first Democratic debate said, I'm sick and tired of hearing about the emails. It wasn't because it
cost him the nomination.
Even though it cost him the nomination, because what's the point of being nominated if the job you're after dissolves? And so that's what's going on here. I mean, they're protecting the entire government by protecting Hillary. And the very best conspiracies are the ones that force your worst enemies to help you out. And that's exactly what Hillary has done.
Okay, Mike, I got one for you.
Yes.
There's a picture of Hillary, shaking hands with some of the worst women abusers of all of them, and getting $100 million to the Clinton Foundation or wherever it went. And, hey, once you go infidel, you never go back.
That's a good one. I did make a graphic about that where Hillary's out there saying, I'm a champion of women's rights and everything except in these countries because they've given me a lot of money, and money always trumps women's rights. And it is a very stunning bit of hypocrisy. It's one of the reasons why she doesn't have the traction with women voters that she was hoping to get, not just because of all the money she's getting from some of the most anti-woman repressive regimes in the Middle East, but because of the way she treated her husband's accusers. And, at the same time, she's out there saying victims of sexual abuse ought to be listened to and they ought to be believed, except, of course, for that white trash trailer park, bimbos that were falsely accusing my husband.
Can I ask you one question, Mike?
Sure.
Okay, the timeline with Vince Foster. Did she actually have her staff at Vince Foster's office before the body was even identified?
The understanding I have, and again, this is going from official records, so maybe not, but that Hillary and her staff basically looted Foster's office as soon as they got word from the park police that the body had been found. and before the Park Police could seal the office as a potential crime scene.
Yeah, right. Yeah. But I'm just saying, I think timing is everything. I think Donald Trump needs to wait till she actually gets the nomination, because Sanders is a bigger threat to Trump than Hillary is.
Yes.
And I think he should wait till after the nomination. And there's just so much goodies on Hillary that I think Trump's a very brilliant man. I think he knows he's got her by the you-know-whats. And I'll let you go from there, Mike.
All right. Well, Clint, I don't think Trump, he's a smart man. And I don't think he thinks that he's got a slam dunk against Hillary Clinton because Hillary's got the corporate media on her side. Donald Trump could have a video of Hillary dropping live kittens into a blender on the White House lawn, and the corporate media would say, this is really no big deal. There are really too many cats in the country. Hillary's working to decrease that surplus cat population. And they would side with her without question. We're starting to see some of these people break ranks, sometimes at the cost of their job. But overall, the corporate media is still very much owned by the corporations, and the corporations want Hillary in the White House. They are absolutely scared out of their minds about Donald Trump. I don't want to see anything bad happen to Donald Trump, but I am really expecting there's going to be at least one serious attempt on his life between now and the GOP convention.
Absolutely. I'll let you go from there, Mike.
All right. Thank you very much for the phone call. Getting back to the war zones, London apparently has been supplying Saudi Arabia with cluster bombs, and Saudi Arabia has been using them on civilians in Yemen. This is a war crime. This is an absolute war crime. Now, over in Iraq, the Iraqi government has just launched an offensive to liberate Fallujah from ISIS or Daesh or whatever they're calling themselves this week. The U.S. claims they're going to be helping, but we know from these past incidents, the frontline Iraqi commanders keep saying that the Americans just seem to get in the way more than anything else, almost like trying to protect ISIS and Al-Qaeda, which we know is actually what the U.S. is doing, because the U.S. has an agenda to form a new nation, Kurdistan, out of chunks taken from Iraq, Turkey, and Syria, without regard to what the people of Iraq, Turkey, or Syria feel about that. Now, as you know, there has been a very long delayed, much politicized report called the Chilcot Inquiry regarding Britain's role in the Iraq War, all the way back in 2003, and it's just been dragging and dragging and dragging. They've now said it's going to be released after the Brexit vote, which tells you that it's not going to be glowingly positive of the actions of the British government. In fact, one of the foreign ministers who's been on the inside is saying that this is absolutely going to destroy Tony Blair's reputation, along with that of Jack Straw and the former head of MI6, Sir Richard Dearlove. And we're seeing another report that what is inside the Chilcot report could possibly lead to war crimes charges against Tony Blair. And I'm sure we'd all like to see him and all these other war criminals in the dock. Probably won't happen. But we know this whole war was on the basis of lies about weapons of mass destruction, and it was really about Iraq wanting to sell their oil for currencies other than the dollar, which they had the United Nations permission to do. Now, down in Turkey, Erdogan has appointed a new premier, and the guy's just a sock puppet. Ahmet Davutoglu stood down and is being replaced by a new gentleman who's perfectly in Erdogan's control, and Erdogan has also stripped the members of the Turkish parliament of any kind of immunity, meaning they can now be prosecuted for any crimes that Erdogan comes up with. He really is getting rather big for his britches. Meanwhile, Syrian Kurds are reporting the Turkish military has crossed the Syrian border into Kurdish territories inside Syria. John Kerry is out there saying that the U.S. will continue war without end on Syria until they have a regime change and they kick out the democratically elected government and replace it with U.S. puppet rule. They're not even trying to hide that's the agenda any longer. U.S. is preparing troop deployment to Libya amid fight for the oil fields. Because just like is going on over there in Yemen, those gosh darn Libyans just won't stay conquered. They won't accept their U.S. puppet rule. So troops are going back in there. All of these interventions have turned into these horrible, horrible quagmires because the people of planet Earth now recognize that what has been going on in all these countries since the end of World War II were not organic revolutions by the people. They were covert overthrows by the United States government, the CIA, and they don't like it. They don't want to live under puppet rule. Why would anybody want to live under puppet rule? Whether it's Iraq under the United States or the United States under Israel. Why would anybody find that acceptable? Now, we're hearing all this talk about a reset of relations with Moscow coming out of Europe, but it's rather kind of hard to reconcile that with this continuing military buildup. The United States is sending M1A2 Abrams tanks right up to the border with Russia. In fact, Russia has not seen such a massing of hostile forces on its borders since 1941. Everybody is spoiling for a war. They want a war because they think that's what's going to save the U.S. economy, or at least distract everybody from the reasons why the economy is imploding. Apparently over in Poland, the government there is pointing the finger at George Soros's various non-governmental organizations as attempting to destabilize Poland's new democratically elected government. Even with all the track record of failure after failure after failure, they're still playing this game because they don't know any other way. We'll be back after these commercials. We got a caller waiting on the line. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We are now getting word from Trey Gowdy that Congress's report on the attack on the consulate in Benghazi will be out before the Democratic convention. That's good news, I think. All right, we're going to go back to the phones. Pete in Florida, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, I don't know if you've already covered it today, but on the drive home, I heard about the appeals judge who overturned a jury decision about the jury who found Bank of America guilty for defrauding all the customers back in 2008, I guess. The judge came out and overturned it and said that the prosecution could not find, could not prove that the board of directors intended to defraud the customers. And, you know, you've had this analogy before about running a red light or whatever, and, you know, you could go to a judge and say, I didn't intend to do it, you know, it was an accident. I mean, that's how the little people are stuck with having to follow the rules and the big people get away with it.
Well, we hadn't covered it yet, but it's definitely on the talking points when we get to the economic news. And, basically gave Bank of America a get-out-of-jail-free card, although nobody actually goes to jail in the United States of America for financial crime, except for Bernie Madoff. He was the exception that proves the rule. And it's another reminder that our court system has become totally corrupted, that they, like every other part of the federal government, believes that money and banks are more important than human beings in this country.
I can only hope that Donald Trump is as genuine as he says he is, and that if he should get elected, he'll really change things up. Because if not, I don't know what we're going to do, buddy. Thanks.
Well, you know, like I said, I would like to avoid a bloody revolution in the streets of the United States because the wrong people get killed and crippled in those things. But I think if we just allow things to continue on the path they're on now, collapse is inevitable, just like the former Soviet Union. Donald Trump, I don't agree with everything that he says, but he's going to shake up this system, and the system is in bad need of being shaken by the throat.
I agree. Thanks a lot, Mike. Keep up the good work.
All right. Thank you very much for the phone call. Down in Venezuela, despite their economic problems and the protests and the rest of it, their government is going ahead with military exercises under the explanation that they think the United States is getting ready to invade. And we know the United States has been trying to get into Venezuela and impose a puppet government going all the way back to Hugo Chavez, who dared sell Venezuela's oil to the Chinese for the yuan instead of going through the dollar. And the U.S. was behind the coup that took Hugo Chavez out of power for a grand total of 8 days. And so Venezuela is correct. They are clearly on the U.S. government's special high-interest targets list, because the goal of all of these wars is to bring all of the resource-rich areas of the world under U.S. control, covert or overt, so that those resources are traded only for the U.S. dollar, off of which the U.S. financial system will make a profit. So they're right to do that. Troubling article out of Global Research up in Canada. The United States holds the world record of killing of innocent civilians during war. Not exactly something we can point to with pride. Got to take a break for station ID. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open. 800-313-9443. We're talking about wars and war zones, and the latest word we have out of the House of Representatives. They're still working on the 2017 military spending bill. And they've already settled on how much money they're going to spend. The sticking point is the language that was going to require young women to register for the draft. Now, they've removed that language because there was a huge backlash against it, but apparently it is still an open issue, with apparently a large number of the members of the House thinking that, by golly, we got to start drafting women and putting them into combat because we don't have enough guys. Now, you go back and you study history, and you will see that when nations start to put their young women into combat, it usually precedes their defeat. Now, I know I'm going to get a lot of hate email from the feminists saying, oh, women can fight just as well as men, and certainly in mechanized warfare there can. Women make excellent pilots. They can drive tanks. They can drive trucks. They can run ships. When it comes to infantry out in the field, the average woman cannot carry as much supplies and ammunition as the average man. That's a reality. But my concern about putting women into combat has to do with the aftermath of the war and rebuilding one's economy. And the nation that puts its women into combat and loses them will be at a disadvantage in terms of rebuilding their population and their gross domestic product. It's just numbers. Now, as we mentioned yesterday, Congress is looking at a new defense and war budget totaling $610 billion with a B, and it's not even for an entire year. It's just until the new president takes office. That's a lot of money. They could buy every single homeless person in America a $1 million house. That is a good way to look at just how much money the wars take out of the pockets of the American people. It's an obscene amount of money. We're in a wartime economy. They don't want to admit it, but we are. Now, Veterans Affairs Secretary Robert McDonald came out earlier today with perhaps one of the dumbest things I've ever heard come out of the mouth of anybody in Washington, D.C., and let's face it, we've heard a lot of dumb things over the years. Basically, he was responding to criticism by veterans of the long wait times for medical care in the VA hospitals, and he came on out and said, well, Disney doesn't measure wait times in the lines for their rides. Why should the VA? Well, for a simple reason. The tourists aren't dropping dead waiting to get on the Pirates of the Caribbean. I mean, it's an absolutely stupid thing to say. Now, over in Israel, the incoming defense minister has declared that disloyal Israeli Arabs should be beheaded. Not just killed, beheaded. And Israel really is starting to act more and more like the Nazis, because a lot of people don't know this. The Nazis used guillotines for executions. And here we have Israel saying it's time to start beheading people who are not loyal to us. By the way, Israel's new terrorism law calls for a death penalty for acts of terror, but only if the terrorist suspect is not Jewish. If Jewish, the death penalty will not apply. But of course, they're not being racist. And anybody who says they are is just being a filthy, Jew-hating anti-Semite who wants Hitler to come back and gas the Jewish babies in the oven. So let's talk about the economy. Story coming out of Investment Research Dynamics, basically telling us what we already know. The economic system is designed to transfer wealth from ordinary people to Wall Street. What does Wall Street give us back for all that money? Pretty much nothing. They just game the system to make themselves insanely rich, to suck wealth out of the population. Now, apparently, shares in Deutsche Bank took a major hit following admissions that Deutsche Bank was involved not only in metals rigging, but in stock price fixing. It's all a crooked operation, right on up to that privately owned central bank. Now, over in Great Britain, there's a British lord who has a solution for the pension crisis, and that is for the British people to work longer. Work until 70 or maybe 80. In fact, if you really want to fix the pension crisis, just let them work until they fall down dead, right there in the factory. That's their solution. Now remember, when you're talking about a pension, you're talking about money that you as a worker have paid in. And now they're saying, well, we can't give it back to you. So you're just going to have to learn to get along without it. Here in the United States of America, one of the nation's largest pension funds, the truckers, is invoking a law recently passed by Congress saying that they can cut benefits to their pension members if they get into financial trouble, which they all are, resulting from that mortgage-backed security fraud meltdown back in 2008. So there are 407,000 workers covered by this pension fund. The pension fund is proposing a 60% cut in benefits, almost 2/3. So for every $100 you thought you were going to get per month from that pension fund, you're only going to get $40. The U.S. Treasury Department is out there saying, no, that's not good enough. In order to keep the pension fund solvent, the cuts have to be deeper. Really, you old people ought to do the patriotic thing and just kill yourselves now so we can save the banks. Seems to be the attitude coming out of Washington, D.C. Now, delinquent debt, meaning debts by business that are unable to make the payments, are now at levels worse than early 2008. It's happening all over again. Why? Well, because every time Wall Street pulls off a scam, whether it's the mortgage-backed security scam or bubble this and bubble that or LIBOR or whatever, and it falls apart, they don't suffer anything for it. They've already got their money. It's in their pocket. It's in their bank accounts down there in Panama. The pain for the collapse of their frauds is transferred onto the American people. Taxpayer bailouts, quantitative easing, TARP. And that is the very essence of a fascist economic dictatorship, where those who make money just keep it, less the little bit that they're giving to members of the government to go along with the scam. And when they lose money, the losses are transferred on to the people. That means you. And they do it over and over again because nobody goes to jail. They get to keep the money they make. You get to pay for the losses. Who wouldn't keep doing that over and over and over again? Now, the de-petrodollarization around the world is starting to grow. It's continuing to grow. China just imported a record amount of Russian oil in April, paying for it in their own internal currencies, not going through the dollar. Now, that petrodollar scam was how the U.S. government maintained foreign demand for dollars after Richard Nixon ended gold convertibility. And that plan is all starting to fall apart. Now, as that caller into the show first hour mentioned, the United States Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit overturned Bank of America's $1.27 billion fine in the Hustle case. And this all had to do with fraud over defective mortgages sold by Countrywide, which was then acquired by Bank of America. This was part of that whole 2008 mortgage-backed security fraud. And the judge came on out and said, well, I don't think they meant to cheat people, but they did cheat them. But in the United States of America, banks are holy. Banks are sacrosanct. We can't touch the bank. We must bow and worship the bankers. They're above the law, no matter how much suffering they cause to ordinary people. IBM is continuing their layoffs. They're now looking at possibly 14,000 jobs lost in the high-tech sector. Meanwhile, retail is not doing very good at all. Story coming out of governmentslaves.info. Wall Street bracing for a retail bloodbath. The retail sales reports are coming in. They're not good. A lot of stores are in trouble. A lot of these large retail chains are having to close up stores. And here's a really bizarre story coming out of Business Insider. The story itself isn't bizarre. What it talks about is the article is the real reason Macy's is falling apart. And they go on in there and they're saying that Macy's just doesn't want to acknowledge what's really going on. Okay? In fact, believe it or not, Macy's is blaming their decline of sales this first quarter on human-caused global warming, saying that the weather was too warm for the clothing they had on the racks in the stores, which is absurd. If the weather is warm, you change the inventory in the store. The reality is people do not have money to buy things with anymore. Macy's is also blaming Amazon, making inroads into the apparel industry. I'm not sure how real that is. When you buy an article of clothing, you want to be able to make sure it's going to fit, not have to send it back time and time again. And one of the big problems with the clothing industry is the system of sizing changes from one company to the next, and certainly from one country to the next. We had a problem with Cafe Press for a while. The extra-large T-shirts were being imported from Asia, where extra-large equates to a medium here in the United States of America. So there really is no standard. Meanwhile, the French farmers are out there saying it is time to end the Russian food import ban. They are losing business. They're losing their farms. They're losing their businesses, all in this chest-thumping contest between the U.S. and Russia, and they've had it. They're just fed up with it. Let's grab ourselves a phone call. Mateus in Canada. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael. It's nice to talk to you again. I've been listening every day, but my work schedule stopped me from calling in for a few weeks.
Okay.
I just wanted to mention that, like the last 1,000 years of history in Europe is just like the selfish royalists wanting us to work while they eat, and then the rest of us just wanting to have a bit of a chance at a life. And it's all these wars back and forth, and finally we forced them to sign the Magna Carta, and then we forced them to sign the Constitution, and all that's happening is the fight continues. They're trying to take it away from us, and we're trying to keep it. That's all that this is. Hillary Clinton is just trying to take it away from us. Obama's just taking it away from us. And this Sanders and Trump most likely are trying to help us keep it. And that's all that's going on here.
Well, if you really think about it, all of these conflicts come down to those who think that everybody deserves an equal share of life's blessings versus those who think they want to own the world and everybody should work to make them rich and allow them to live in golden temples built to their everlasting glory. And it really does come down to that. And the pendulum swings back and forth and back and forth. And you're absolutely right. The nobles forced King John to sign the Magna Carta, at which point he ignored it. So did some of the nobles. But it's always going back and forth. And when you look at it, it always comes down to the strong will take and the weak will surrender until the force of necessity is balanced on both sides. Then you hear about these fictions called justice and morality coming on in. And if that breaks down, then you've opened the door to an outright war and a revolution. And like I said, I'd hate to see it in the streets of America, but I'm hearing so much talk about it, and I can understand why people are frustrated and angry. And that's why I say if the GOP convention ousts Donald Trump, I think there will be rioting in the streets of America, and not just at the convention. Yeah,
most likely. And it's just important to remember that our our human rights are never respected voluntarily. We always force them to respect them. So we had to start chopping off heads and winning wars to get the Magna Carta signed. Right? It wasn't just signed out of goodwill.
No, it wasn't. John had no choice. He was looking at a revolution. We had to fight a revolutionary war to kick out Great Britain, and then we turned around to the new government and said, okay, here are the rules, and as long as you follow the rules, you are our lawful government and you have our consent. And now we have a bunch of politicians who've gone back the other way. They seek a neo-feudalist society where all of the real assets and wealth are owned by a few people and everybody else lives in permanent debt servitude.
Right, just like they've been trying to do for the last 1,000 years in Europe, and they have been doing quite often. And so the right to own and bear arms is obviously the right to continue the struggle against these tyrants that want to take our human rights and freedoms away. It's so obvious and basic.
Of course that's what it is. Of course that's what it is. I mean, the Second Amendment talks about the security of a free state. It's talking about military weapons. When the Second Amendment was written, nobody needed to guarantee the right to hunting rifles or target rifles. They were indispensable to life. This is about making sure that the people can match the central government militarily in case that central government gets too big for its britches. And that's why all these statists and tyrants are out there saying, oh, guns are bad, we got to take the guns away. You know, at the same time they're spending your tax dollars to give guns to ISIS and Al-Qaeda and through Fast and Furious, these Mexican drug cartels. They're getting all the guns that we would like, courtesy of the U.S. taxpayer, but we're not allowed to have them.
Right, because the U.S. government has been completely conquered by organized crime families.
I think the U.S. government is an organized crime family.
Well, Hillary Clinton is an organized crime family mafia don. That's what she is.
Yes, I would agree with that. I mean, tangled up in drug running and assassination and bank fraud and the rest of it.
And the murders.
And yes, lots and lots of murders, lots of dead bodies piling up around them. And but the good news is people are now picking up on what's going on. I mean, we're brainwashed through childhood and school that our government is good, they're swell people, they only care about us. Now we see the federal government for what it truly is. Now we see the political class for what they truly are. And it's a very, very ugly picture.
But it's refreshing that people are getting the picture on a large scale right now.
Yes, they are. Okay?
Thank you, Michael.
All right. Thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go. Turning over to Great Britain and the Brexit. The fear campaign is mounting up there. If Britain leaves the European Union, cancer research will come to an end. You'll all die horrible deaths. World War III will start. The space aliens are going to come on down and enslave everybody and suck out their brains or whatever they're saying here. But we're seeing all these voices coming on out saying that Great Britain has to leave or they're simply not going to survive. And basically, a lot of people have been looking at that movie about the Brexit, which exposes that the European Union government is not a democracy. Yes, there is a European Union Parliament, but it has absolutely no authority. It can't create a law. It can't repeal a law. It can't veto a law. All the laws in the EU come out of these unelected European Union commissions. It's a giant bureaucracy that is answerable to nobody except the European Central Bank. And the British people are coming to realize they're not in control of their own country any longer. And that is something they're not comfortable with. There's no reason for them to be comfortable with that, not being in control of their own country. So they want to take back power from this self-serving elite that is trying to build a new world order. There's another reason for Great Britain to get out of the European Union right now. As you know, there's a deal being negotiated whereby Turkey will become part of the European Union. Once that happens, polls are showing that there are 12 million Turkish citizens who are already planning they're going to move to Britain. 12 million new Turkish citizens coming into Great Britain is going to put a huge strain on social services, on the economy, on the job market. It could be the straw that breaks Great Britain's economic back. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And Aloha America, we're going to go to the phones. Fred in Philadelphia. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Greetings, Mike. Boy, you're starting out with a lot of energy, and I appreciate it. I want to talk about a huge issue, and it's a constant issue that people have to keep in their mind, keep uppermost in their mind, and that is banking fraud, loan fraud, and the fact that the Clintons not only were doing that, but they were experts at doing it. They were very brazen and complacent about getting away with that, and that affects so much in not just the economy, but in governmental decisions. The fact that you can have a complete looking the other way or a breakdown in regulating who all these loans go to.
Well, you need to understand the pressure that the government is on to go along with these things, because if the government came on out and said there's all this fraud going on, without the fraud, the economy would have collapsed by honest means long ago. And they'll start playing these little games, and they'll always say the same thing. This is just a temporary emergency stopgap measure. Then, of course, it becomes permanent, because these stopgap measures don't actually solve the underlying problem, which in the case of private central banking is, by design, it's creating more debt than money with which to pay that debt. There's an article.
Mike, I want to ask you a question.
Go for it.
Do you think that that what happened basically in investigating Whitewater is that people got tired of that work, kept getting repeated, but it's still underlying that they were really talking about corruption. It wasn't just a real estate deal. It wasn't just friends of the Clintons and fraud. It was how you basically lead the government. You go into the bribed by donors and end up destroying all the work, honest work that honest people are doing. It's about everything is what the Clintons were involved with.
Well, they're an extreme case, unfortunately, of a common trait among the political class, that they're there for their own wealth and power and glory. And yes, whenever the political system enriches one of the cronies, it's coming out of ordinary people's pockets. We're seeing it with the decline of our infrastructure. We're seeing it with the flooding of our stores with shoddy products at inflated prices, dangerous food, additives, vaccines that do more harm than good. All of these things become acceptable because it all makes money for the people who are addicted to money. And when you go back and you look at the history of the Clintons, you're right. It isn't just a land flip. It isn't just the strange death. They had links to the CIA's gun and drug running for Iran-Contra. They were running some of the money laundries for that. It was just this huge, gigantic network of crime, and it's tied up very much with the Central Intelligence Agency. And we really need to stop allowing these kind of people to have control of our nation, because they're not running.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. This is like that state was like a testing ground to see how much people could tolerate, or how much propaganda could be used to hide what was happening. It was a testing ground. They had the skids greased for them to get elected.
Well, there's no question about that. I mean, when the Lawrence Commission really was looking into the money trail for Iran-Contra, and they were getting closer and closer to George Herbert Walker Bush, and he knew he needed to be a single-term president, because if he'd stayed in the White House an additional 4 years, there's no way he could have held off the investigation for all 4 years. And so he basically stepped down, and he arranged for the White House to go to the one Democrat that he knew would keep the dark secret, and that was, of course, Arkansas's Governor Bill Clinton. We see the White House get handed off like this all the time. When Richard Nixon started to seriously get in trouble, he understood that Spiro Agnew didn't know all the dirt that needed to be covered up. So they chased Spiro Agnew out of the vice presidency, and they put in Gerald R. Ford, who had served on the Warren Commission and knew all the dirt that linked Nixon to the Kennedy assassination. So Kennedy steps down, Ford becomes the president, he issues the blanket pardon, and basically that was the end of the investigation. Thank you for the call, Fred. We got to let you go. We got to take a break for commercials. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about the refugee crisis here, and there's a very interesting story came out of Press TV. And apparently, as Syrian refugees are flowing through Turkey, Turkey is making an effort to convince Syrian scholars, engineers, artists to stay in Turkey. Then the rest are shipped off to the European Union. Now, remember what I said about how immigration, especially illegal immigration, and migration act as filters. You are not getting the best representatives of that source country. You're getting the people who couldn't make it there, fleeing prosecution, troublemakers. By the way, apparently 4 of the refugees that were relocated to Indiana last year have tested positive for infectious tuberculosis. Wasn't all that long ago that tuberculosis was considered eradicated here in the United States of America. Now, a story coming out of the independent in Great Britain. The EU and IMF deal over Southern Europe hangs over the Brexit debate. And what the EU and the IMF are trying to do is present this image that there are some places in the European Union that aren't doing all that well, but overall it's healthy and it's going to stay that way. But we all know the reality. Southern Europe is not doing very well, especially Greece. Great Britain and Germany have been paying the lion's share of propping up the rest of the EU. And if Great Britain leaves the European Union, the ability of the EU to repay loans to the IMF will be cut in half. And that's why the EU and the IMF are working as hard as they can to keep the British people enslaved to the European Central Bank, because they need their labor. They need their slave labor to keep their little Ponzi scheme going a little bit longer. Apparently over in Rome there was a huge anti-migrant rally, and basically people saying, this is my home, stop the invasion. Meanwhile, over in Paris, hundreds of migrants with metal bars and pieces of lumber trashed an historic Paris train station, just went on a riot. 2 sets of migrant groups attacked each other, and police parked vehicles and pedestrians. And they wrecked this historic building. Now, as you know, the United States has been using 9/11 as a one-size-fits-all excuse for aggression. First, it was Afghanistan, and we trashed Afghanistan, and then the U.S. government said, oops, our bad, we're sorry. Actually, it was Iraq. And we went in and we trashed Iraq. And now the U.S. is trying to say, oops, our bad again, is our face red? It was actually Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia has fired back now saying that no, the United States planned and carried out the 9/11 attacks to justify wars of aggression and continues to blame others for them. And people are, of course, paying attention to what the Saudi government is saying on this issue, because we know the U.S. government has lied about 9/11 almost since the very, very beginning. Actually, from the very beginning. We know the U.S. and Israel are up to their necks in 9/11. And the fact that the court system that was supposed to be prosecuting the mastermind Khalid Sheikh Mohammed has now been proven to have been destroying exculpatory evidence only reinforces it's just a gigantic war-starting hoax. Just like when they told you Pearl Harbor was a surprise, or they told you the Lusitania wasn't carrying weapons, or torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin, Spanish mine in Havana Harbor, and on and on and on and on. How many more times do you have to be lied to until you understand the U.S. government controls you with lies, fraud, and deceptions? Now, over at the TSA, which around here is known to stand for the Tourism Suppression Agency, with all the talk about the long lines and everything, Congress just gave the TSA an additional $34 million because TSA was saying, well, we're underfunded, we don't have enough gates, we don't have enough people. So they get an additional $34 million. And the head of the TSA is saying, well, despite the new funds, you can all expect more airport security delays. And certainly here in Hawaii, it's rather frustrating. We're now having to wait in line at the airport for 2 hours to catch a plane flight that lasts 20 minutes. On airplanes that really can't reach anywhere else other than where we're going. It's not like we're facing a danger of being hijacked. Get on those little tiny inter-island planes and say, fly me to Cuba. We can't possibly get there. We can't even get to Los Angeles. What is going on is an extortion racket. They're trying to get everybody to fork over $85 so that you can be a member of TSA's pre-check. And it's a protection racket. It's extortion. You know, we're from the TSA. If you don't give me $85 protection, pre-check, something bad going to happen. You're going to miss your flight. Your luggage is going to get broken into. That's what they're doing. We have a government which from top to bottom, left to right, front to back, is openly pillaging and plundering the American people. Whether it's the TSA looting our luggage, or the police with civil forfeiture, or the NSA putting out all this ransomware, it's open season on the American people. Now, as you know, getting on back to the Hillary Clinton campaign, one of her areas of vulnerability, especially with women, has to do with Bill Clinton's sexual dalliances, including the problem with Jeffrey Epstein. And what's going on there is it's now come out that Bill Clinton was riding on Epstein's private playpen aircraft at least 26 times, far more than had been officially admitted to. And what's making this really kind of complicated is the government has now struck a deal with Jeffrey Epstein, where they're negotiating settlements for all of the victims as long as they won't file charges. They're basically going to take a bunch of taxpayer money and buy off the witnesses so that they're trying to make this go away. And the reason is probably very simple. I am certain that Jeffrey Epstein had that aircraft and his little island pleasure palace down in the Caribbean wired with microphones and cameras. And he's got all these people on camera, and he can blackmail them. And it looks like he's going to skip out, because there's a promise now there will be no prosecution of Jeffrey Epstein, even though he's acknowledged what was going on. So let's talk about mental illness on parade. That's the name given to it from an article in Natural News about whether you call it biological subjectivism. In other words, you are what you think you are, what you imagine that you are. You can self-identify regardless of biology, regardless of reality. And by the way, the good news is my guppies all self-identify as my children, so now I can deduct them from my taxes. And I advise you all to do the same. Now, a little bit of news that's going to anger a lot of people, and yeah, I'll admit it, I'm angry too. The police officer who was charged, the only person charged in the death of Freddie Gray, has been found not guilty on all charges. And I think that's probably going to upset a lot of people. The mayor of Baltimore is out there saying, please don't, go violence and riot. And it's another reminder. The police can basically do whatever they want. They can steal from you. They can shoot you. The police are murdering more innocent Americans than all the mass shooters and the terrorist attacks put together. And with the civil forfeiture laws, they are stealing more than all the robbers and burglars and muggers put together. I mean, it just really is absurd. All right, so let's talk a little bit about human-caused global warming, because, let's see, I'm having to deal with there's a hacker attack on my server right now. New World Order using climate change agenda to enslave humanity. And this is an article coming on out of Investment Watch blog. And basically, everything that they talk about in dealing with human-caused global warming has to do with this idea that we have to pay carbon taxes, we have to buy carbon credits, we have to turn over more of our money to the elites, and we have to let the elites tell us how to live our lives. So it doesn't matter how hard you work and how much you earn and what you've done in your life, you're going to wind up living in a modified shipping container. So that all the rest of your wealth can be siphoned off for the elites. You must make do with less so they can have more. You must make do with less so they can have more. That's the constant message from the money junkies. Because they are money junkies. And it doesn't matter how much they have, it's never, ever, ever going to be enough. Out here in the real world, China just got hit with snowstorms and a blizzard just weeks before the official start of summer. Now, below the equator, winter has hit hard and early. And down in New Zealand, in central Otago, there was a group of 36 people got trapped by snow. The defense forces went in to try and rescue them, couldn't reach them. It's going to be a really hard winter down under. And this next winter will really hammer home the point. We are going into a new little ice age because the sun is in a period of lowered energy output. It's a repeat of the Maunder minimum, a repeat of the little ice age, and everybody who was out there saying humans are warming the earth and you got to give us money to solve the problem was lying to you to get your money. By the way, somebody did an interesting little survey, and they found out that people who claim that they're worried about climate change tend to use more electricity and resources and fossil fuels than people who just don't seem to think it's an issue at all. It's counterintuitive. You would think people who are out there saying humans are warming the world would be among those who are the most careful about the use of fossil fuels and electricity, but it isn't. And it sort of reminds me about, again, Michael Crichton's book, State of Fear, where he just took this whole fraud apart, where the people who were out there saying global warming, we've got to do this and we've got to do that, and they were all rich people and they lived in big, luxurious houses with huge carbon footprints. But it was a cause they could feel good about, and they could feel like they're doing something important without actually threatening the power elite, which is a very dangerous thing to do. But there is a lot of hypocrisy out there. Over in Spain, they've had a little bit of an embarrassment because there was a wind turbine suffered a failure. One of the blades came right off and hit a Spanish home. And apparently, blade failure has become the most common accident for the entire wind industry. They're not built that well. The blades come off. And they hit important things. And of course, once you lose a blade, that can lead to the failure of the bearing in the turbine itself because it's unbalanced. Also, at the world's largest solar plant, there's been another fire. It's not doing very well, is it? Okay, now then. As you know, I've said many times that one place where we can claim victory here in the independent media is we have taken away from corporations and governments their ability to lie with impunity to the people. And they're in a panic because they can't do that. They've gotten by with frauds and lies and deception so long, they don't know any other way to run a country. And we're starting to see all this effort to try and say, we have to regain the ability to propagandize our own people. The U.S. government is now admitting they're spending your tax dollars to propagandize you, to lie to you. That's what propaganda is. If it was the truth, they'd say, we're telling you the truth. When they use propaganda or public relations, it means you're being lied to and somebody's making a lot of money doing it. So now the United Nations is getting in on this. They've set up a group, a real bureaucracy at the United Nations, the Counterterrorism Committee, that is now calling for a framework to censor the Internet, to counter what they're calling hateful ideologies and digital terrorism, meaning those of us who are trying to tell the truth about what the government and the United Nations are really up to. The problem is we see that's what they're doing. And as is always the case throughout history, lies, propaganda, deceptions, cover-up only work if the population doesn't understand it's going on. Once the people of a nation or the world understand government has lied to them, they're going to presume it's still more lies. That's what happened to the former Soviet Union. They didn't have the internet, they didn't have personal computers, but they did have fax machines. And there was an ad hoc network set up called the Samizdat, where Russian citizens would write these articles exposing what government was doing, and they'd put it into the fax machine. And it would send it to 10 other fax machines where it would be read and then put back into the fax machine and go to 10 others and 10 others, 10 times 10 times 10. And it covered the Soviet Union quite thoroughly. And the Soviet government tried to intervene with it, interrupt it, find some way to stop it, because it didn't have a central originating source, they couldn't. And it led to the people of the Soviet Union understanding just how corrupt and dishonest the Soviet government was. And when Chernobyl happened, and just made it inescapable that the government was lying to try and save itself embarrassment, that's what led directly to the collapse of the Soviet Union. And it's going to happen here in the United States as well. And what you're seeing, whether it's the United Nations talking about countering online digital terrorism and everything, there's a historical precedent. And it goes back to Gutenberg. When he rediscovered movable type printing and books became affordable to the middle class, literacy expanded and people began to share ideas, and there began to be this information flow that was not directly under the control of the ruling class and the church. And they viewed it as a threat. The church especially, because every church had a slightly different version of the Bible based on whatever they felt they wanted to be teaching their congregants and getting from them. And people began to say, hey, if the Bibles aren't matching up, then how do we know which one is the unassailable Word of God? And the ruling structures of the time, governments, rulers, and the church, all tried to silence books and printing in much the same way we're seeing governments and the church try and silence the internet. And in the long run, it didn't work. And in the long run, it's not going to work here either. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, as we reported last week, there have been a couple of incidents of intentional destruction of broadcast towers up in Sweden. And I mentioned at the time the similarities to the Gleiwitz incident, which was a hoax perpetrated by Germany to launch the war against Poland, where Hitler had a bunch of his people dress up as Polish nationals. They even took along a real Polish prisoner and shot him dead so the body would be found. And they attacked the radio station at Gleiwitz, and the radio station at Gleiwitz was broadcasting, oh, we're being attacked by Polish nationals, we're being attacked, horror, horror. And 24 hours later, Hitler went on the radio and said, Poland has attacked us, and they will attack again unless we go to war against them. And they marched into Poland. And turns out the similarities may be intentional, because apparently Stockholm is saying that they're convinced Russia is destroying these television radio broadcast masts. Why? Why would they do that? It doesn't make sense. Remember, to tell if you're being lied to, look for what should be there and isn't. And what isn't there is a reason for Russia to go all the way to Sweden and chop down a couple of broadcasting towers. It just doesn't make sense. It does make sense for somebody to chop those towers down so they can say, see, Russia is coming if we don't attack them. One of the reasons to study history is so you will recognize the dirty tricks when they get played again and again and again. History may not repeat, but it does rhyme. And after so many thousands of years, it's not like they can really come up with an original idea anymore. So yeah, they play the same dirty tricks over and over and over again. Now, there are an unusually high number of volcanoes in a state of eruption all over the world right now. We posted a link to this volcano research site which lists all the currently erupting volcanoes. And there's a lot of them, and some of them are really nasty eruptions that are causing some damage. Everybody's wondering what's going on. Is the Earth getting ready to hatch and Cthulhu burst into the universe? But what may be going on is actually the subject of an article over in Weather Cycles, saying that the volcanic activity correlates with a prolonged solar minimum, which, if you think about it, actually makes a lot of sense. Because as the Earth's crust cools over a core that generates its own heat from radioactive decay, that crust is going to shrink a little bit. It's going to make it easier for volcanic vents to open up. And so it makes a lot of sense that a cooling Earth is going to see an increase in volcanic activity. Now, there's an article, again, over at Investment Watch blog about science bloggers and skeptics, those who are supporting the status quo on things like global warming and vaccines, and they don't approach the issue very scientifically. There's the music. Got to take a break for station identification. More about this when we come back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And finishing up on this article, there's a huge online campaign trying to shout down people who doubt the safety of vaccines, who are concerned about GMOs and toxic food additives, those people who are saying, hey, how can there be human-caused global warming when there's so much snow and ice around, and basically pointing out they're not following scientific method. They're acting as bullies. Intimidation, threats, outright censorship. We've heard calls of trying to apply the RICO statutes to anybody who questions human-caused global warming. Well, that's not going to work, because a RICO statute, as it says, racketeer influencing, somebody's got to be paying you money. And nobody's paying me any money for my opinion on global warming. We're surviving entirely on advertising revenues and your very generous donations, which we need and always appreciate. But that's what tells us it's propaganda. They can't come out and argue the science. And they can't convince us to ignore what we see with our own senses, our eyes, ears, skin, in favor of what the TV has as a pretty colored little chart there. All right, we're going to take a phone call. Tom in Florida. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Mike, good afternoon. Can you hear me, Mike?
I can hear you just fine.
Yeah, Mike, by the way, you're speaking of earthquakes. I was watching the news on CNN, the Communist News Network today. The earthquake is in Austria, where he just elected, supposedly he's a Nazi. The news networks are starting to say there's a Nazi now in power in Austria because the guy is, he's so against immigration. There's an earthquake for you. And that's just the beginning of earthquakes. Like I say, vents are going to open up everywhere. Now, getting back to seriously about global warming, and then we'll talk about what's going on in Europe. Mm-hmm. The global warming, at one time, wasn't Greenland called Greenland, and there was a place called Iceland? Why was Greenland called Greenland, Mike, do you know?
Because it used to be green, and when the Earth really was warming back in the 1990s and the ice did retreat from the shoreline, they found all this evidence of Viking settlements, where apparently the Vikings were living in Greenland, and they were raising crops and livestock, proving that the Earth had actually been much warmer back then than it is now. And
that is correct.
Yeah.
That is correct, Mike. And Newfoundland, there's a big Viking settlement. There was actually Vikings in Maine,
yes.
Maine of the United States,
yes.
up into Canada.
Yep.
Have you ever heard of Inuit people?
Yes.
They have Viking blood in them. Did you know that?
Yes, I did know that. And they've even found the remains of Viking settlements all the way down into New Hampshire.
That's correct. And let me ask you this, Mike. I saw a documentary years ago, and the greatest carpenters in the world today who are builders of ships, the greatest carpenters today, we live right now, cannot build a Viking ship they could build 1,000 years ago. And when I mean that, they couldn't build the draft of the Viking ship. They didn't know how to get that final draft on that Viking ship.
Yes.
Today, which they did 1,000 years ago. Now, you tell me what's going on.
Well, I mean, history is full of all kinds of forgotten technologies. The Baghdad battery, for example. We know that the Egyptians were actually able to do gold electroplating on their jewelry. We don't know how they did it. We only recently rediscovered the secret of Egyptian blue pigment. A lot of knowledge gets lost when a new technology comes along, and people will forget the old technology, And then 2 or 3 generations down the road, they'll look back and say, how the heck did they do that? Because it's all been lost. They still don't understand what the Antikythera machine was all about. There's a lot of lost knowledge. Plus, you have these deliberate attempts to suppress knowledge, like the burning of the library at Alexandria, in which a lot of medical knowledge was lost to history forever.
That's correct, Mike. And another thing, if you look at the hieroglyphics in Egypt, you'll see the lighter skin the Egyptians were, the higher their caste was. The same in India. But the reason I'm saying that, that's why this guy in Austria wanting Austria, and it's going to happen all over Europe because the people are going to finally realize they're definitely trying to dilute. They're trying to dilute the white, the Northern European Anglos, or however you want to call them, the Northern, whatever. They're trying to dilute their bloodline. And it's disgusting what these schmucks are getting away with, like in, say, England, France, Germany. You got the Stasi in Germany running the whole place, that Merkel berserker. And it's absolutely absurd. And the people are going to wake up, and it's going to be a disaster.
Well, they're already...
It's going to be a good thing because the people are going to actually say, you're getting out of here.
Well, they're already waking up here, and they're realizing that a sense of nationalism is, in and of itself, not a bad thing. You know, I want to take care of my home, I want to take care of my country, and the rest of the world's going to have to look out for itself. Now, the people who are pushing for this new world order, this much dreamt of global fascist economic dictatorship, what they're trying to do is blur everybody together and destroy our sense of regional, cultural, ethnic, and historic identity. They're even trying to make us not even sure about our gender identity, because if we're just completely confused and muddled in our head about who we are, it's much easier to control us. And that's why they're attacking the Confederate flag, they're tearing down Confederate monuments. Anything that an identity not approved of by the government can coalesce around is currently under attack.
You're absolutely correct, Mike. But you know what? The Jews don't do that. They don't allow that in Israel. They have a wall around the country of Israel. Look at the Vatican. They have a wall 39 feet high all around the Vatican City. This dope we got in there. This dope as a Pope in Latin. And let me tell you another thing. They're not Latins. They're Hispanic. All these people keep saying they're Latin. Only if you're from Rome and you speak the Roman language are you Latin. You have nothing to do with the Latinos. The Latinos are Italians. They were not the Hispanics in Spain. That's another big farce and conspiracy perpetrated lie by, I don't know, guys like Soros, and all these other imbeciles that are perpetual liars. But I got to say this. People are waking up. It happened yesterday in Austria, a great thing. And it's going to happen in Germany. It's going to happen in England. It's going to happen in France. It's going to happen in Denmark, in Belgium, and all the other Northern European countries are going to wake up. Scotland is pretty tough right now, and they're going to realize, hey, all these countries are going to wake up and say, this is enough. We smell the coffee, and it ain't happening. Now, as far as the Muslims, I agree with Donald Trump. Let's make safe zones in Syria. Let's make safe zones over there in Turkey, wherever. But don't bring them here. Look at Constantinople. What do we have to Constantinople? That was a great city at one time, Mike.
Yes.
You know anything about that?
Well, now, first of all, you know, in history, Muslims have done tremendous works of engineering in city. Again, the migration.
I don't doubt that. I don't deny that.
Okay, yeah. The migration refugee process is a filtering process. We're not getting the best of the people from the source countries. And again, you're absolutely right about Israel. Israel's out there cheering on. Yes, Europe's got to take the Muslims and the Syrians and the Turks, but Israel will not allow them into their own country. Israel is absolutely racist. This new law that says terrorists can be executed unless they're Jewish basically tells you what's going on inside their mindset. Okay?
The Jews in this country, these liberal Jews in this country, are telling you not to have guns, but they tell everybody in Israel to walk around with a Uzi.
Yes.
So what does that tell you about what these Jews are actually trying to do in this country? They're trying to take this country down. And
it's a double
lie what they're doing. It's just
Tom, hang on a second. You know, it's the classic double standard. It's okay for us to have the guns, but we're afraid of you, so we're going to take your guns away from you, so that we are always in power over you. That's what it's about. Israel does not support the Bill of Rights. They do not support freedom of speech. They believe in total dictatorship, where everything is controlled by the government. And even a lot of the people in Israel are getting fed up with that whole nonsense. Israel's new coalition government has just gone so totally right-wing. They're slightly to the right of Attila the Hun right now.
I agree. And another thing I found out about Israel, of all the countries, they're like the most fifth country in the world that are atheists. They have more atheists than they're in the top 5 as far as atheism goes.
Yes.
That country. So that's another problem that people don't talk about is the atheism, what's going on. People don't even want to believe in anything.
Well, and then they run around saying we're God's chosen people, even though most of them don't actually believe in a God. You know, which is fine. I'm an atheist too, and so anyway, anything else, Tom?
Hey, Michael, one more thing. You're talking about the New World Order. Look at George Bush Sr. and his whole family. Mm-hmm. Jeb Bush was going around saying he better speak Spanish and English in his household. But I say to myself when he was running for president, why don't you go run for president of Mexico, Jeb?
I imagine that Mexico probably has a citizenship.
If you don't speak Spanish, go down to Mexico. You probably get voted in.
I imagine that Mexico probably has restrictions on who serves as president down there, just the same we do. Got to be a natural-born citizen. I don't know that for a fact, but I think any nation, just out of common sense, is going to try and limit the government to people actually born and growing up in that country. Otherwise, you're just giving the country away to anybody who can come on in with enough money and media clout to steal the country. The reason the Founding Fathers put that requirement in our Constitution is you need to remember the history of Europe and the European wars was pretty much fresh in their mind back then. And they came to understand that much of the strife and turmoil of Europe came from all these ruling families who were intermarrying among each other, and you wound up with countries whose rulers couldn't even speak the indigenous language. And it led to all kinds of troubles. And so the Founding Fathers said, look, we're always going to make sure the government of this country is born of this country. And that's why we have the citizenship rules for all members of Congress and the citizenship and the natural-born requirement for the president. And those are good rules, and we should not lightly cast them aside.
Well, Mike, one more thing. I was listening to Michael Savage last week. He was off the chain last week, and he was basically telling the audience, his listening audience was very huge. He was telling them that in Europe, they're sissifying the white males over there. The most popular name in England now is Mohammed. Babies being born. Mm-hmm. You got a Muslim mayor in London. I mean, Savage was off the chain last week. I don't know if your listeners will know this, but he was telling it, hey, look what they're trying to do to the white males in this country. They're trying to sissify them down. That's how they're going to take this country down. You start talking about transgender and all that. They're trying to mix us all up so the males are not even muchacho or macho anymore. I mean, it's unbelievable what they have done to this country in the last 30, 40 years. It's horrific.
Well, do you remember?
Maybe we get a guy like Trump to straighten this nightmare out.
Well, that would be nice.
Is off the chain when he's saying, and he basically telling everybody. He told Donald Trump. I heard the audio.
Okay, Tom.
He told Donald Trump there's a race war against white people.
Tom, calm down. You're drinking way too much coffee. I want to make a couple of comments here. First of all, we know that the intentional blurring of our populations is part of the New World Order. I don't know if you were listening to the show last week. I was talking about this unofficial survival guide for Scripps students, which included the comment that hatred of whites is appropriate because of past oppression. And you're absolutely right. There's a war on white people going on. They're trying to stir up racial discord in this country. Same thing with Freddie Gray and Trayvon Martin and all the rest. Somebody wants race riots in this country. Now, I reject this idea that hatred of whites, or for that matter, anybody, for past crimes is appropriate. I refuse to accept responsibility for events that happened before I was born. I refuse to accept responsibility for events I have no control over. This idea of inherited and collective guilt is total USDA choice bovine excrement, but that's part of what's being used to try and control us, to say, we must support Israel, we must do this, and so forth and so on. Listen, slavery is wrong. Don't get me wrong about that. My ancestors ran a station on the Underground Railroad helping escape slaves to freedom. Why is it appropriate to hate me because I'm white when my ancestors were, trying to help the slaves to freedom? It's a brain dead kind of agenda there. But this idea of generalizing and casting collective guilt and inherited guilt is just another way to try and get people to go along with a policy of, we're going to take away from you what you've worked and earned and give to these other people over here, because of something that happened before we were all born. And it's nonsense, and it's gone way, way too far. And we need to go back to the idea of meritocracy, where those who want to work can better their lives, and those who don't want to work can just sit on the beach and carve coconuts if that's what they want to do. But these politicians who come along and get elected by saying, we're going to take a whole bunch of stuff away from legal American citizens and give it to the illegal immigrants, that's definitely hijacking the nation and the political system, and it does have to stop. Now, the good news is that all of this New World Order nonsense, the refugees, the immigrants, and all the rest of it, is failing miserably because the founding philosophical principle of the liberal establishment is that humans are born with an absolutely blank mind, the tabula rasa, and everything that we think and feel and believe in is a product of our environment. And so by controlling the environment in fine degree, liberals believe they can control our minds. It doesn't really work. It's all based on Margaret Mead's book, Coming of Age in Samoa. And she was an intellectual fraud. The book has been completely discredited. We are all products not just of our life experience, but our inherited, heritage from past, our ancestors and the rest of it. We carry that forward with us, our instincts. And Margaret Mead made her whole career on fraud. A lot of people don't remember this, but it was Margaret Mead back in 1975 that suggested humans were warming the world and this would be a good thing to bring the world under, global liberal control. And it's just a complete fraud. And the failure of this immigration process in Europe underscores the fact. It's based on a flawed concept and a faulty theory, and they're raising on a busted flush, and it has triggered this intense nationalist backlash. And I can understand it. I want America for the American people. And again, I'm not anti-immigrant. If you want to come to this country and go through the legal process to be a citizen, welcome. Come on in. I hope this nation lives up to your expectations. These days it probably won't. But just to say we have to drop all the borders and let everybody run wherever they want to run, and all of a sudden we have tuberculosis back in the country. We have all these acts of violence, going on all over Europe and the United States. Crime is going through the roof. That's nonsense. It's not wise and prudent management of the nation.
Michael, we have measles back in this country. But one more thing, I'll let you go. I know you got other callers in, but I just want to say this, Mike. In 1865, the day Lincoln got assassinated, okay?
Yeah.
I want you to know this, and I want you to listen to the audience to understand this. I saw a documentary. There was more black slave owners in this country than there actually were white at that time. Or just as many. And I got to say this. There's 438,000 slaves in the United States in 1865. You know how many white males killed each other for them? You never did. None of these Afro-American kids know none of this. 726,000 white males on the North and South died in the Civil War for the freedom of 428,000 slaves, let's say. And if you look at Lincoln's papers in 1865, right before Bush shot him, he was actually going to send them all back to Monrovia, Liberia. That's what they were going to do. That was his paperwork. And nobody ever talks about what his Lincoln's modus operandi would have been if he would have survived the Civil War. And that's what he wanted to do. His intention was to send as many as he could back to Africa with farm equipment and everything to make their own continent again.
Okay, well,
you know that?
Yeah, I know that, but you need to remember that the Civil War was not really about freeing the slaves. That was just a public excuse. The real purpose of the Civil War was to reconquer the Confederate States and bring them back into the Union, because at that time in history, the Confederate States had the lion's share of the gross domestic productivity of the entire nation. And without those tax revenues...
You're 100% correct.
Okay,
100%.
all right. Okay. All right, so, Tom...
Michael, one more thing on that.
Okay.
That you're not adding to that. And during that time, okay, on the slave issue, okay, what was going on when these... blacks were free. A lot of them, believe it or not, did want to go back to Africa. I don't know if they had the means to. Some of them did go back. I think it was like maybe 28,000, 30,000 of them did go back. But most of them, if you would have done a survey on them at that time in 1866, they would all probably mostly wanted to go back.
Well, most of them didn't want to go back because life in the United States was still considerably better than it was in Africa. And listen, anybody who says, the modern-day descendants of the American slaves are suffering so much, look at the descendants of the American slaves and the lifestyle they have versus the people in Africa who were never slaves, their ancestors weren't slaves. Look at the difference in standards of living. The people, the blacks who were brought to the United States of America have had a better lifestyle since the end of the Civil War.
Well, Michael, there's 428,000, now there's 41 million of them here. There's 41 million blacks as descendants of slaves.
Yes.
So I think they did pretty good in this country. And they ought to realize it and look at the cities of Detroit, Chicago, and Philadelphia. I mean, come on. There's your answer right there. Look at what's happening in the inner cities.
Yeah, but
right now.
again, politicians get votes by saying, oh, you're all victims, you suffered. If you will vote for me, we'll take money away from, the descendants of slave owners and give it to the descendants of the slaves. There are no living slave owners in the United States of America. There are no living slaves. Period. End of discussion.
Again,
It's
Michael,
a hoax and it's a fraud.
Half of them were black owners. Half of the slave owners back in 1865 were black.
That's true.
I hate to tell you. Look it up.
Okay. Well, Tom, we're coming to the end of a computer. We're coming to the end of a commercial break here. I got to deal with another hack attack on my server. Thank you for the phone call. We'll be back after these words from our sponsors. We've got another caller waiting on the line. Oh, hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. And we got a bunch of callers waiting online. We're going to start with Barb in Lake Worth, Florida. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. Nice to hear you again.
Thank you.
My topic is the vice presidential candidate. And I like Jan Brewer. And I was just wondering what you think about Jan Brewer, Governor Brewer. She fought, in the immigration issue, and she was so good.
Yeah,
and,
I think there's a possibility there, definitely.
I know sometimes they want somebody who can bring in a lot of votes, electoral votes, and balance out the country, from one part to another. I don't know how well she would do that, but I know, she is in the Southwest, and I think she would bring in a lot of support there.
Well, she would, and she'd also undermine Hillary Clinton's campaign to rely on the female vote in the country. You need to understand that the vice president actually does not have much of anything to do with the government other than serving as president of the Senate and the backup for the president should the president become incapacitated somehow. John Adams actually called being the vice president the most boring job in the entire government.
Yeah, but she would vote if there's a tie in the Senate, so that's important.
Yeah, well, how often does that happen?
Rarely, but I think Al Gore did it once, if I recall.
Once.
Correctly. My memory isn't too good, but anyway, I just want to put in my vote for Jan Brewer. She's a delightful lady.
Well, I think it would be good if Trump got a female vice presidential candidate. And there's a bunch of them out there. I'd love it if he'd bring back Cynthia McKinney. Or failing that, let's draft Ron Paul in there because Trump's going to have a vice president who is his ideological match in order to deter somebody deciding to take him out of office the hard way.
But please, no to Gingrich. No. Please. Instead of a contract for America, it was a contract on America. He did nothing for us.
Okay, well, listen, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to switch to Frank in Pennsylvania. Aloha, Frank. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Okay, Mike, excellent comments today just about the immigration policy and what's going on in America with the immigrants coming over, the illegal immigrants coming over. Now, for an example, if you see K through 12 American schools, they push vaccinations on these children ungodly. They have to get all these vaccinations. And if these children are not vaccinated, they're banned from going to school. And if the parents have doubts about the vaccinations, they're chastised, basically. They push vaccinations on senior citizens. They put vaccinations on college students.
Down in Australia, there's a financial penalty if you refuse the vaccination. We just put up a story at WhatReallyHappened.com where apparently children in the Common Core schools are being shown vaccine propaganda movies, then given a quiz, and if they don't answer the questions the way the vaccine propaganda wants them to, they get a failing grade.
Right, and then you have millions of illegals. As we speak right now, there are probably illegals crossing the border that have no medical screening whatsoever. We don't even know their history of tuberculosis. We don't know their history as far as venereal disease or of hepatitis. And they're allowed to stay here.
They're all bringing them in. We know that for a fact tuberculosis, infectious tuberculosis, has been brought into the United States of America with some of these refugees. Scabies, HIV, H1N1, bubonic plague. A couple of cases showed up out in Arizona. This is a health disaster for the country. Of course, for the medical industrial complex, wow, more money. The people are getting sicker, and we can take more money from them.
But they're not requiring them to take all the vaccinations they're requiring the American kids to take, Michael. That's the dichotomy. We try to make sense of this government, and people that have critical thinking try to say, well, wait a minute. You're forcing all these vaccinations on the general population, but these illegals are allowed to stay here with absolutely no medical screening whatsoever. Like you said, these diseases could be communicable. They could be a health disaster. They could be a complete epidemic in some parts of the country. And yet we're told, well, they have to stay. They have a right to have a pathway to citizenship. Doesn't make sense, Mike.
No, it doesn't make any sense. Well, it does in the context that these illegals and refugees can't afford the vaccination, so they're not going to make a big stink about it. You know, the vaccinations are being forced on Americans who have money to pay for it all, because it's all about money. Vaccines are a $27 billion a year business in the United States of America. It must be protected. It must be nurtured, because money is more important than humans. Thank you very much for the phone call, Frank. We're going to let you go. We got another call waiting, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to grab some phone calls here. Yvonne in Virginia. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today? Hello, you're on the air.
Oh, hi. Yeah, thanks for taking my call. Listen, I just wanted to make a comment that one of your callers made a few calls back, and it was in regards to the fact that blacks were slaveholders.
Yes.
And what he has to understand is that when blacks held slaves, it was a way of buying your family members back. They would allow, in the South, they would allow people, they would not allow you to free slaves, but they would allow you to buy slaves' freedoms. So you would find situations where men would buy their freedom, they would buy the freedom of their wives, they would buy the freedom of their children, and that is what he's looking at.
Well, I thought any slave owner in the South had the right of manumission, where they could free a slave. And it wasn't just the South. I mean, Thomas Jefferson, in his will, freed his slaves, especially Sally Hemings and her children.
That was, yeah, but after a while they changed that, where you could sell people, but you could not free them, and that was when this started.
Okay, all right, I see what you're saying.
That initially, but not, towards the end, you could not free blacks. You had to buy them. So that's why it looks like that. Okay?
Oh, okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. We're going to switch over to Peter in Los Angeles. Aloha, Peter. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, I got a couple things, but I wanted to start out with the Newt Gingrich thing. Somebody said, please not Newt. And other than the fact that recently, of course, he's totally owned by Sheldon Adelson. But back in '94, when he took over as Speaker, and in the interim between the time they took over the Congress and won the election in November, and then took over in January. He made noises back then about a more even-handed policy in the Middle East. And I thought to myself, oh, this, come on. He's not serious. I wish he was, but he's not. Well, it turns out that what he was doing was driving up his price, because in a little snippet about 3 or 4 months later, I saw that his wife, I think it was the wife that he divorced by fax or something, was selling land, real estate, and was making like $800,000 a year selling real estate in Israel, and she was living in Potomac, Maryland. So, I mean, that's the way they paid him off. But the other thing is, I wanted to remind people of 2 Clinton scandals. One was in 1994 when Bill Clinton cut a memo to Doris Miser, the head of the INS, to prematurely naturalize and make American citizens, I don't know, about 500,000 or 1 million people who were in the citizenship pipeline. But in order to do that, Mike, they speeded up the process, and they did not do the normal background checks for criminal stuff.
Yes.
And it turned out they let in about 70 or 80,000 criminals. Then the other one, the anti-terrorist thing, was, remember back when Hillary was going to run for Senate and Bill pardoned all those Puerto Rican terrorists
yes.
who actually made lethal attacks on people
Yes.
in order to get the Puerto Rican vote?
Yes.
Remember that one? One more thing. Her point of vulnerability, and I hope that Trump or whoever, Trump is all over this, is that damn Clinton Foundation. And if I were Trump, I would have detectives and I'd have people all over that Clinton Foundation. I'd be writing blizzards of FOI, Freedom of Information Act stuff on that, and lobbying people.
Well, there's a problem with that. Freedom of Information Act only applies to government documents, and the Clinton Foundation is a private organization. They're not subject to Freedom of Information Act requests. They are subject to various laws regarding reporting of their finances consistent with being a charitable foundation. But my understanding is it's not even really legally set up as a charitable foundation. The necessary paperwork isn't there. So finding out what's going on, especially when they've got these two cutout offices, one in Europe and one in Canada, where donations, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, say no more, are coming into these offices. They're bundled together and forwarded to the Clinton Foundation, simply saying from the Europe office, from the Canadian office. So they're definitely taking steps to conceal where the money is coming from.
Mike, if I were Donald Trump, I would have detectives. I would be encouraging with big rewards, whistleblowers. I'd be doing all sorts of things to bring transparency to what is definitely a huge criminal enterprise.
Well, I'll tell you something that Donald Trump might want to point out is, the computers at the Clinton Foundation are incredibly secure. You can't get in there and find out what they're doing, standing in sharp contrast to Hillary's email server holding U.S. secrets, and it was wide, wide open. Somebody needs to keep making that point. Yes.
That's a fabulous point. Well, anyways, that's my 2 cents, and thanks very much, guy.
Thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go here. Now, getting on back to this basically open season on white people. How dare you be white? Well, it's the way I was born. Just the way it is. Now, as you know, they're having this white privilege conference in Philadelphia, and apparently this professional educator got on up. And her position was that requiring students to show up at a specific time and grades are a form of white supremacy. That's the latest thing. The demands of punctuality, that's white supremacy. Insisting students get A's or B's, that's white supremacy. That's complete and utter nonsense. But that's the kind of drivel they're putting on out there to try and convince the black population that they are oppressed by the whites, and the only way that they will ever be free of them is to vote for Hillary Clinton because she's secretly black inside. She self-identifies as a black person and a former slave inside all the blonde hair and everything, which we know isn't really blonde at this age. Now, here's a good example of why people do not trust the medical industrial complex. There was this company called Theranos. It was run by a lady named Elizabeth Holmes, and it was supposed to be based on this brand new revolutionary form of blood testing. And at one point, Theranos was valued at $9 billion. And as it turns out, it was a gigantic fraud. Most of the blood testing they were doing was actually sent out to outside labs. The blood testing they did on their machines turned out to be just heavily flawed. People were getting bad diagnoses. Some people may have been made worse. If anybody died, there's a criminal case there. But at this point, the tests done internally on the Theranos machines have all been voided, and the company's valuation is effectively zero. And there's two things to keep in mind there. Three things, actually. One, there's a lot of fraud out there. Two, the government agencies that are supposed to be watching out for fraud were, as usual, asleep at the switch because, hey, it's making money and that's all that counts. And three, all these people who got suckered into investing in this company and lost their money is a reminder that just having a lot of money doesn't mean you're any smarter than anybody else. And we see that very often with people who have advantages and they think they're superior human beings. No, they're not. They're just people with advantages. They were born rich or they got lucky or something like that. Doesn't necessarily mean that they're smart unless they make the effort to go on out and do their due diligence, which in this case they didn't. Now, Doug Kaufman, and this is coming out of Investment Watch blog, has thrown a new wrinkle into the issue of bogus diagnoses of cancer, which even the National Cancer Institute says is epidemic. Millions, literally millions of Americans are being falsely diagnosed with cancer and then sold chemotherapy and radiation, sometimes both. They did jail that one doctor that was doing these bogus cancer diagnoses on perfectly healthy people and put him in jail for 45 years. Now Doug Kaufman is out there saying that there are certain fungal infections that mimic cancer symptoms, and that many of the cancer diagnoses out there may in fact just simply be fungal infections, which are easy to treat. But if everybody's out there looking at a choice between a $5 bottle of something for a fungal infection and $45,000 of chemotherapy, guess which way they're going to be looking at? Because medical care in this country is not about medical care, it's about profit, 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 profit. Now, apparently up in North Dakota, they've had yet another oil spill. A site run by Denbury Onshore LLC in southwestern North Dakota has spilled more than 120,000 gallons of oil and fracking wastewater onto pasture land, which means it's no longer suitable for grazing. And again, the infrastructure just isn't there. They're trying to do everything so cheaply that it's all breaking. They're cutting too many corners. There's no margin for error. There's no safety in any of it, whether it's Fukushima or these oil systems. I mean, look what happened at the Deepwater Horizon. The Minerals Management Service, which is the U.S. government agency responsible for collecting royalties from all these companies and also responsible for safety, just was looking the other way. The manual blowout preventer on the Deepwater Horizon was 4 years overdue for required maintenance, and the Minerals Management Service just looked the other way. So when the well exploded and the blowout preventer failed, that's why all that oil flowed into the Gulf of Mexico, which they hid with Corexit, because the oil dispersants do not make the oil go away. It just changes its density so it sinks to the bottom of the Gulf, so you can look out on the Gulf of Mexico and say, see, the water looks clean, the problem is gone. No, it isn't. It's just out of sight. Story coming out of The Guardian. Official advice on low-fat diet and cholesterol is wrong. And we have seen a lot of these reports come out lately saying that cholesterol was demonized to sell cholesterol control medication, to get people to stop buying eggs as they came from the rear end of a chicken and buy processed egg-like substances in cartons that had the cholesterol removed, for which you paid considerably more money. Turns out it wasn't a problem. It was just something. They created a crisis that didn't exist to sell you more products. And they're saying a focus on low-fat diets doesn't really address the obesity crisis. Okay? Because eating fat doesn't make you fat. Overeating in general makes you fat. What makes you overeat? Monosodium glutamate, aspartame. There's literally chemicals in the food that will make you eat more, and that's where the obesity crisis in the United States and Great Britain is coming from. Because the government allows corporations to dose the food with chemicals that make you eat more to boost profits. So we all need to go back to natural, organic food, nothing that's processed, nothing with added chemicals. Those chemicals are not there for your benefit. Those chemicals are there for the benefit of the stores and the corporations, to make them last longer and reduce financial loss, to make you eat more, to make you crave more. Apparently, the latest survey is showing 75% of U.S. nuclear facilities are leaking tritium. And the problem with tritium is that it can combine with hydrogen and produce water and be carried around by rain and groundwater streams so forth and so on. And it's highly radioactive. 75% of U.S. nuclear facilities are leaking this material. They don't care. If it gives you cancer, more money for the cancer establishment. Now, Robert De Niro has apparently had tremendous pangs of conscience, if you will, over allowing the movie Vaxxed to be banned from the Tribeca Film Festival. And he's announced he's going to do his own vaccine documentary because Robert De Niro has a child with autism who got that autism after that mandatory series of vaccines. So De Niro's up there in Cannes for the film festival, and he's talking about, his current movie, another boxing movie, Hands of Stone. Then he's talking about he's going to do his own vaccine documentary, and it's being produced by Harvey Weinstein, who's a major industry powerhouse. This film will have distribution. And apparently De Niro has been seen talking with Robert Kennedy Jr., who is a long-time, well-respected vaccine safety activist. So it looks like De Niro's going to put his weight behind a vaccine documentary. Now, over the weekend, there were worldwide protests against Monsanto, hundreds of thousands of people in 50 countries around the world protesting the biotyranny, the bioterrorism, if you will, of Monsanto, saying it's time to get rid of the frankenfood seeds and go back to safe, natural food. Right now, Russia, of course, has declared they're going to be the primary source of GMO-free food for the world, and everybody's beating a path to their door. Article coming out of GMWatch.org talking about recent news article and statement by the United Nations that science has confirmed GMOs are safe to eat, saying no, in point of fact, there is no such proof. That UN panel chair and co-chair are financially linked to the biotech industry. And this other article in the newspaper they're talking about is saying exactly the same thing. There is no science. It's merely assertions. It's safe, it's safe, it's safe. Go ahead and buy it. Meanwhile, here in the U.S., organic sales hit a new record of $43 billion in 2015. It's now a bigger business than vaccines, without having to be made mandatory. The U.S. government is not going to sit still for that, by golly. They're allocating $3 million of your tax money to mount an ad campaign to convince the American people GMO foods are safe and healthy and they can go ahead and eat them. And that includes tax money taken from people who know better. There's the corruption right out there. They don't care about your health. They never have. All they care about is how much money they can get out of you. And when they can't get any more money out of you, then you are of no use to them whatsoever. Over in North Dakota, 1 out of every 3 fracking wells has a leak, or has had a leak. 9,700 wells total, leaking fracking waste into the ground. All right, we got to take a break for our last commercial break. Back with the last segment of our program after these few words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Last segment of our program today, and we're going to take one more phone call today from Werner up in New Brunswick. Aloha. Welcome back to the show. Long time no hear. What's on your mind?
Same on my side. But you just brought up Monsanto.
Yes.
Weeds are a big business in the supply industry for the farmers, as they've been over the last 60, 70 years. And you remember, you probably have heard about Johnny Appleseed.
Yes.
That went across the North America and put apple seeds in the ground. Okay. Now we are dealing with Johnny Wheat seeds.
Yes.
I've been following this up now here for the last 45 years. When I first came here to Atlantic Canada. And in 2008, I made a raw footage, 45-minute YouTube. It's on the internet.
Okay.
About the deliberately introduction of alien and very aggressive wheat species. Some of them I remembered from the old country, and some of them I had read maybe the winter before in my farm paper, that they had become quite a nuisance in other parts of North America. And guess what? The next growing season, they show showed up here, and they showed up in a pattern most of the time.
Okay, Werner, I have to make a comment here. I understand that invasive species are traveling all over the world. It's the downside of global shipping. It's a huge problem here in Hawaii, where we have this very delicate ecology, and things are coming in inside the ballast tanks of ships that ought not to be here, harming our reefs and everything. That's a far cry from saying it's being deliberate, and I would require a high standard of proof that it's being done deliberately. But certainly it is being done accidentally, and not enough precaution is being taken to prevent this from happening.
I understand that, but when a new weed species shows up on the headland of a field about 8, 10, or 12 feet wide, the existing crop is burned off, and then this new species shows up in those strips, or in places in the back part of a field next to the woods where somebody can sneak in and sneak out without people paying attention to it.
I would have to see. I'd have to see a little more proof about that. For one thing, I wouldn't even understand why they would clear a strip and plant the weeds.
No. The weed seeds are being put out together with a selective herbicide that kills the crop that's grown in that field.
I got to tell you, I'd have to see some real hard proof on that one because.
Watch that YouTube.
Email me the URL, okay? And I'll take a look at the.
It's a 2008 YouTube, and just Google my name.
Well, can you find it and email it to me, and I'll take a look at it, okay? So,
okay, good.
Werner, thanks a lot. We're going to let you go here because we're almost to the end of the show here. Apparently, they've had another scandal up in Ottawa where a retired priest has admitted to sexually abusing young parishioners. He's out there saying, God knows I'm sorry. Okay, well, let's see. There's the music. It's time for me to get on out of here. I got to do Jim Goddard's show up in Vancouver. We'll be back here tomorrow on the Republic Broadcasting Network talking about whatever's going on between now and then. So until we meet again tomorrow, stay safe, stay informed, stay skeptical. Share what you know with who you know. And again, if you can spare a few pennies for the What Really Happened donation fund, we would really appreciate it right now. So we'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.